Good evening and welcome to the overnight edition of From Day One. Tonight we again hop back to July 28th, 2015 with Richard Dolan and Art Bell as we're talking UFOs, the bread and butter of Art Bell's existence. So without further ado, from the high desert in the great American Southwest, we return to midnight in the desert as we march through Dominion.
Wanna take a ride? Exclusively on the Dark Matter Digital Network. This is Midnight in the Desert with your host, Art Bell. To call Art, please dial 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952-CALL-ART.
Richard Dolan is my guest. We're discussing the state, actually, of ufology, because that really is a good way to put it in the world. We're discussing the state. UFO Armageddon. Well, I don't know about that. I'm sure at the moment that became obvious. It felt like Armageddon, but it's not Armageddon, and onward we go. There's going to be these kinds of mistakes, and we're going to see more of them, aren't we?
Yes, I have no doubt. None of us are infallible. All we can do is our best. You try your best not to make missteps along the way. The thing is, the field, the subject is intrinsically difficult. We're dealing with, I think, the most difficult mystery of our time. And the second layer of that is that, yes, there is government obfuscation surrounding it. So, at times you feel like you're groping around in the dark, and you just have to do the best you can do.
Can you characterize the secrecy itself, UFO secrecy? I mean, how is it? There must be a large manipulation of information. It must be very compartmentalized. I don't know. How does it work?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would want to say about this is that the phenomenon itself, and we discussed this going way back, required, at least in the minds of those people who had the secret, the necessity for maintaining absolute secrecy. So along those lines, it meant control over media, academia, science, and if someone thinks that that's impossible, I think they should look again. In fact, forget UFOs. There's a lot of evidence to show that those institutions are very much in bed with national security and financial institutions that are intertwined with them. You have the creation of black budgets. This is very important. So that is what we would call secret spending is an integral part of the system. We might know them as special access programs. These are programs within the U.S. federal military budget that there's no oversight for. And that's the official ones. And that's officially we're talking $50 billion or more. In reality, I think the black budget includes much greater amounts of money in terms of proceeds from narco trafficking and securities, banking fraud, and the like, which are deeply intertwined with the intelligence community. So a lot of this money is floating around. On top of that, you have, along with it, I guess I should say, illegal criminal financing of programs based on these unvouchered money. So you've got, no one really has any idea how much money is going into the black budget world. And a lot of that, I think, or a portion of that goes into the UFO technology program, because I think that understanding and replicating this is key.
You really think, I'm sorry, you really think narco money is going into black budgets?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
Well, look, narcotics trafficking is, it's probably one of the top 5 industries in the world.
Absolutely.
And just because it's illegal technically doesn't mean that no one wants it. Everyone wants that money. Everyone wants that money.
That's right.
And drug trafficking, by the way, is a long history in Western governments. Britain was drug trafficking in opium and forced it on China back in the 1840s. The United States CIA was involved in drug trafficking from the end of the Second World War onward. The Golden Triangle out of Southeast Asia, it's all CIA.
Oliver North.
You have the cocaine connection in the 1970s and 80s, which we now, it's absolute. They did a movie, Kill the Messengers, about Gary Webb, all about that. This is... no one is acknowledging it, but that doesn't make it any less true. So yeah, narco trafficking is a big part of the black budget money, I think, that circulates. And then, laundering that creates its own There's all kinds of, the laundered money goes into other types of business ventures, I guess I should say, and it gets leveraged into other things. So it's a huge financial win.
So that implies the U.S. It implies the U.S. makes deals which essentially say, look, you've got a lot of money, more money than anybody will ever need. We need money for one of our black budget projects, whatever it may be. You get the money to us. We offer you some level of protection. I mean, that is the kind of deal that has to get made, right?
Yeah, I think that's basically about right. I mean, it's a mafia type of a world. Unfortunately, when people watch news groups like CNN, they get the kindergarten version of reality, basically
Yes.
the propaganda version in which we have elected officials who sort of work for us and work for freedom, and none of that is true. I mean, not one aspect of that is true. What is true is that you have the United States acting as the police force for an international financial empire. That's what it does. And because the reality is so upside down from the official CNN version of things, I mean, the CNN is necessary to exist because, I mean, my God, if they were to actually tell the truth on what they're doing, it would be a revolution the next day. They'd be dusting off the guillotines. So you have to have absolute lies. I mean, that permeates our world.
Richard, you mentioned CNN, so I can't let this pass. There's a lot of recent discussion on the web about CNN and connections to the CIA by some of their reporters, perhaps even higher up.
Well, obviously. I mean, obviously. Back in the 40s and 50s, I don't mean to sound like, oh yeah, obvious, but really it is obvious. The United States ran something known as Operation Mockingbird back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and they're successors to Mockingbird to this day. And really all that was is a CIA coordination with American establishment media, Washington Post and New York Times and the rest, managing the news, creating spin. All of this is all out in the open now. We know about this. Now it's beyond CIA. You got the Pentagon, which has billions of dollars in its budget simply to manage its image, and that includes news control, that includes public relations, that includes social media, that includes the creation of what are known as sock puppets, that is spelt fake persona under the messages and the news articles that you read. I mean, a lot of those are fake Pentagon employees. So it's crazy. And the CNN, think about this. CNN is a part of a private corporation, which is Time Warner.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I fly a lot. I'm sure you fly.
I do.
A lot. Every single U.S. airport, I do not think there's an exception. Anytime there's a TV at any gate, and there's thousands, you always see CNN. And the question I would ask is why? Why CNN? Why is it that a private company is able to get such a sweetheart deal in every American airport to be seen? I mean, they have the monopoly of information on every U.S. airport. That is not by accident. And that is, I would argue, explicitly because they act as the propaganda arm of the United States government.
I agree with you. But, as we discuss all this, frankly, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, it really is. When you realize,
I'm laughing, but yes, I certainly agree with you.
When you realize the state of your own government and what you're being fed, it really is ultimately a little depressing. Now, is there a way to punch through all of that?
Yeah, I think, and I would love to continue at some point. I don't want to just keep rolling over our interesting discussion, but there are many more facets of the structure of secrecy that I think are worth discussing. Mm-hmm. But in terms of punching through, the only way that I personally know in my life is to do the work that I do, to do the research that I do, to write in as clear, cogent, and engaging way as I can, to get people worked up and caring about why the truth matters. I'm here to say truth does matter, and it does matter that we not go through our lives basically sleepwalking through, being spoon-fed, lies that are designed to keep us placid and content with the kind of illusions that are around us. I think that there's more to our lives, and there's more to my life than that. So I think the way to punch through is with diligent, careful research and fearless exposition of the truth.
You have a very lucid presentation, and I wonder, if others in high places have noticed that, and I wonder if you have ever been approached to modify in some way something you're saying.
Well, right. So if I were to tell you something, people might think, well, I don't know if I believe him or not. But I have never been approached. I have never been threatened or asked to modulate anything that I've said. Not one time. Not a single time. Now, honestly, when I look at my own public position, I mean, I have readers and I have people who like what I do, but it's not really in the millions. I mean, I still think as a UFO researcher, I'm still a relatively small player, and maybe that's why. I think the so-called powers that be, maybe they think, well, he's just working this fringe market. He's not really, he's not on MSNBC or CNN, so we don't have to worry about him. Maybe that's it. Or maybe there are other ways of disabling people. You know, the revelations of Edward Snowden, for example, talked about how GCHQ, that's Britain's version of the NSA, are expert, really, in destroying public reputations. This is one of the things that they know how to do very well. So I would think that, in fact, they tried to do this to Glenn Greenwald, and Greenwald outed them on that. So I think that that's actually, one tactic that groups might use. I mean, there's always a way to compromise an individual. We're all human, and there might be ways of, if hopefully that's not going to be the case with me, but I've never been threatened. I do think that I've been monitored. I went for a couple of years where I was stopped at every airport I flew out of. This is about a decade ago. They would let me fly, but they would make me wait 15 minutes every single time while they ran my name. And they never told me why.
All right, well then let me come at it from a different direction. Do you think that we, the collective we that talk about this kind of thing, are useful to them in some way?
Yeah, I think that we can be if, well, first of all, there's a long history of intelligence operations where groups are infiltrated by operatives to be guided in a certain direction. I mean, classically, that was called COINTELPRO. The FBI ran that for years.
Yes, sir.
And this kind of thing continues to go on to this day. And again, these are more of the Snowden revelations, and not just Edward Snowden, but a lot of this other information has come out. So I think are infiltrated, and I think that does include the UFO community. So the question we really want to be asking is, who are the spooks in the UFO field? Because maybe that's where what we should be asking. And there's constant rumors and speculation that people have about various individuals. But I think, so that's one way that the community can be guided.
Well, we've got the spooks in
I think that was the case with MUFON for years, by the way. It still might be, for all I know.
Well, sure. They've got to know where we are and whether we're headed in a direction that might worry them. So, yes, of course, there are spooks.
Right. So, the question is, to what extent are they able to use public figures or researchers like yourself or like myself or other people to their benefit? And with me specifically, I don't know how they would, because I'm not aware that they do. But certainly one thing that you could easily see them doing would be to have a public individual who's got prominence to steer away from certain sensitive issues and onto other things that may be kind of red herrings.
Or you might imagine they do things like, I don't know, produce the Roswell slides that ultimately turn out to be almost Armageddon for ufology.
I suppose. Of the people involved in the Roswell slides, only one of them is some of his motives I don't really know that I can really vouch for, and that would be Adam Dew, who did come into this and seemed to be very interested in making money off of those slides. Relating to Tom Carey and Donald Schmidt, look, in my opinion, I know both of these guys, there's not a chance that they were actively engaged in any kind of disinformation. I will never believe that. In terms of Jaime Maussan, a lot of people like to criticize Jaime as a showman or, someone who has latched onto a lot of questionable cases. I think the latter is true. I think he has. Personally, I do like Jaime, and I've enjoyed talking to him over the years. But I think his judgment was fallible. I don't think that he was engaging in disinformation.
All right, good enough. We're at another break point, so stand by. We'll be right back from the high desert, raging in the nighttime. This is Midnight in the Desert. I'm Art Bell.
As always, we'll return once our musical interlude is complete. Richard Dolan and Art Bell will be back. As we continue to march on here in the dungeon. Pick up our spears. Yeah, let's go for one more trip. So once again, are you ready to take a ride as we return to Midnight in the Desert, July 28th, 2015, with Richard Dolan and Art Bell. UFO eugenics is tonight's topic. We just now wait for the announcement from The Voice.
Desert spans the world. To call us from outside the U.S. and Canada only, use Skype with a headset mic if on a computer and call MITD 55. That's MITD 55.
Richard Dolan is my guest, and I think I want to ask him a little about presidents. Richard, almost every president that has come into office, let me back up, when they're running for their respective nominations, they're always asked, Mr. would-be president, Mr. nominee, whatever, if you get into office, will you open the files on UFOs? Inevitably, oh yes, we'll do that first thing. And a number of presidents have been asked about this, and then one always has to wonder if after they're in office for, well, probably in the first 24 hours, somebody sits them down and gives them the talk.
Yeah.
Think that's right?
Well, most, I think, significantly, this happened many years ago with Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably the best example. Although now the question does seem to come up with regularity to presidential candidates now. But Carter, was the first, I think, the first U.S. presidential candidate who openly said, hey, I saw UFOs. And I explained it was in Leary, Georgia, back in 1969. And he never said it was a spacecraft, but he did see it with a group of people, and he thought it was unusual, and he didn't know how to explain it. And I think wisely, he was just very open about it, and he didn't really catch any media grief over it, like Dennis Kucinich did years and years later.
Mm-hmm.
But Carter did, because of this open attitude, he was asked, and he said, yeah, look, if I have an opportunity to declassify UFO files, he said, as long as it does not affect national security, and that was a big caveat.
Sure is.
But he added, yes, I would do it. And one of the big stories of Jimmy Carter's first year as president, and this is kind of a forgotten story, but it's important. People like your guest last night, Grant Cameron, wrote about it, and I also wrote about it in one of my books. The year 1977 was his first year as president, and this was a year that thousands and thousands of letters came to the White House from constituents, citizens, who talked about their UFO sightings and asked President Carter to end secrecy on UFOs. They were getting mailbag after mailbag of letters coming into the White House. all in the spring and summer of 1977. This is an incredible thing. Thousands of them. And, in fact, Jimmy Carter, as far as we can tell, did, I guess we could say carefully or tentatively look into the possibility of having a federal agency kind of resume the job of the old Project Blue Book, which was what the Air Force had in the 50s and 60s to investigate UFOs. And he was looking at the possibility of NASA taking on that role. And what we can now see very clearly is that NASA, with the CIA standing right behind them, said, no, we're not going to be doing this. No way in hell, not ever, not a chance. And, I mean, they were just saying this to the president. The other thing that I can say about Carter, you asked about, did he have a sit-down where he was briefed, and I think the answer to that is yes. And one thing that I mentioned in one of my books, AD After Disclosure, was a story that came to me from, this is one of my few anonymous deep throat sources, and I hate having to rely on such people, but the fact is that I'm not allowed to use this man's name. What I can say is that he was high-level CIA and he is an absolutely brilliant man. I know him somewhat well. I've had some long conversations with him, and he and I share another very close mutual friend. All I can say is this guy knows a number of former U.S. presidents and former directors of the CIA and former secretaries of defense on a first-name basis. Okay. I asked him on one occasion, what do presidents know about UFOs? And his short answer was, well, some know more than others. And then his long answer, he got into some specifics. And the Jimmy Carter story that he knew was as follows. In June of 1977, he said to me, Carter was briefed on the matter of UFOs/extraterrestrials. He was briefed in June of that year. This is according to this man. Now, the man was not present at the briefing. He said he does know, and he was very careful in how he qualified all of this, but he said at the end of the briefing, Carter was seen at his desk, head in hands, elbows on the desk, sobbing.
Right.
That was the story as it came to me, and all I can tell you is that I believe the man who told me the story, and the day will come when I'll give his name up, but right now I just don't feel that I can. So, I mean, if I put that together along with everything else that I know, what I'm guessing is that Carter was told something really devastating about this. Now, it could be any number of things. Like, A, they're here to put us in their cookbook, or here they're here and you're never going to be able to control them, or we've got an extra governmental agency controlling, and if you talk, we'll kill you and your family. Who knows what they said to him?
You've really got to think about it, though, to get a man like Carter sobbing, head in hands. It's got to be really bad. Whatever.
I mean, Jimmy Carter was and is an extremely intelligent man.
He is, yes.
Highly, highly intelligent, and I don't think that he would crack that easily. Something got to him. So, but what we do know on the official record is that by September of 1977, he had basically given up the game. He met with a fellow named Eric Gary, who at the time was prime minister of the little nation of Grenada, which was a country that America invaded under the Reagan years. In the late 70s, Gary was the prime minister, and he was a UFO witness himself, and he had this, he was the gung-ho guy at the time who wanted the United Nations to officially recognize UFOs and have a study group, and Gary was getting attention. So Carter met with him in September of 1977. We know this, and we don't know everything that was said. But after that, basically, the U.S. policy on the Grenada Initiative was essentially to kill it. U.S. and Britain subverted it, so that never went anywhere. So I think what happened is that Carter got himself into a position where he probably didn't realize just how deep into it he had stepped. And I think was briefed in the middle of the year and realized, oh man, I cannot go forward with this.
Can you even imagine if you were given that briefing, what could be bad enough to cause you to begin to shed tears?
I can imagine. I have a couple of these stories, actually, not simply of presidents, but of undersecretaries and other individuals who talked, and the stories became known to me. But what would be said is, Well, and another one came to Ben Rich, by the way, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, from Kelly Johnson, supposedly. This is told to Rich. This is third hand. But Kelly Johnson said the same thing to Rich, which was like, the truth on this is awful, horrible, terrifying. The public can never know it's that bad. So what could it be? Well, one thing could be that, there are beings here that would probably terrify the hell out of most of us. You mentioned Whitley Strieber a couple of times. I know Whitley fairly well, too. And one of the most salient things that Whitley said about these other beings, in my opinion anyway, was just how not up to speed we are in dealing with them. He said, like, when you're dealing mind to mind with these beings, it's almost like your soul is stripped naked, like you're just not able to connect. I mean, you're like a cowering dog in front of a frightening human being. So his opinion is that we just don't have the capacity to deal with these other beings. And what if that's true? How could we, as a species, as a civilization, relate to them when their very presence kind of disrupts our field, as it were, or disrupts our mind?
I actually had,
way we can deal with it.
I actually had Whitley break into tears during an interview, and the poor guy has really, really taken a lot of ribbing because he has told. He did particularly so, Richard, on my show. He came up with brutal truth, and it really was brutal and somewhat embarrassing for him, and he's taken, frankly, a lot of undeserved heat for that. I have so much respect for Whitley. We have been very close friends, and the way he played it, the truth he told, caused me to... I get very angry with the people who do that to him.
They should read his work because he's one of the most thoughtful people out there. I mean, aside from anything else he has to say, he's actually one of the deep thinkers in this field that we really need.
Yes, sir. I've got a break here. We'll be right back. Richard Dolan is my guest. Midnight in progress.
Okay, I believe this one actually has the dark matter news coming up. If it does, again, we will take it because it'd be interesting to, of course, know what was going on in the world of supernatural back there, July 28th of 2015. If not, though, we will quickly return to the show once our music interlude is done.
For Dark Matter News, I'm Leo Ashcraft. A city with no people sounds like a post-apocalyptic nightmare. But this is M-City, a fake metropolis sprawling across 32 acres of land situated at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The test environment officially opened this month and was formed as a controlled setting to test out driverless cars, complete with connected roads, traffic lights, and pedestrianized areas. It makes sense to test out the driverless cars in real yet human-free scenarios before the modern technology is applied in real life. There are bridges, tunnels, unpaved streets, roundabouts, faded markings on roads, and even graffiti on street signs. The realism is to ensure that even something seemingly minor, such as graffiti obscuring a sign, doesn't impact how automated vehicles handle road situations. Working with the Michigan Department of Transportation, the university hopes that there will be 20,000 connected, driverless cars on the street of Michigan by 2021. Well, we've had a constant stream of brand new information about Pluto in the past few weeks, and fortunately for Pluto enthusiasts everywhere, there's plenty more to come. The revelations continue with icy plains of Pluto and its atmosphere, which we can only see when looking back at the dwarf planet towards the sun. Pluto is covered in a fascinating array of geological features. Images show that a sheet of nitrogen ice flowed along the surface and still might be flowing. Even though the ice is made of nitrogen, not water, it bears similarities to glacier movements on Earth. At Pluto's temperatures of negative 390 degrees Fahrenheit, these ices can flow like a glacier. In the southernmost region of the heart, adjacent to the dark equatorial region, it appears that the ancient, heavy-cratered terrain has been invaded by much newer ice deposits. You might have thought the fun was all over once New Horizons passed behind Pluto, but there's still a host of exciting discoveries to ponder. From the backside, Pluto is completely dark, nearly indistinguishable from the blackness of space. But the sun impressively illuminates a gorgeous haze around the planet. For more detailed coverage on any story that you hear, or if you have a tip or suggestion, visit us at darkmatternews.com. The Kremlin says its new nimble satellites are just for communications. The 95-foot-tall, 118-ton rocket booster, an unarmed version of a Cold War nuclear-tipped missile, 75 miles above Earth's surface, the rocket's nose cracked open and its payload spilled out. The rocket carried Rodnik communication satellites. It's customary for Rodnik satellites to deploy in threes, but in notification to the United Nations, Moscow listed 4 spacecraft inside the Christmas rocket. This discrepancy was strange, and it got stranger. Rodnik satellites, like most orbital spacecraft, don't have engines and can't move under their own power. So it came as quite a shock to some observers on the ground when the rocket's 4th satellite, designated Cosmos 2491, moved, propelling itself into a slightly different orbit. Whatever Cosmos 2491 was, it wasn't some innocuous communication satellite. And over the next year and a half, Russia launched 2 more of the mysterious maneuvering spacecraft, each time sneaking into orbit as part of a routine ComSat launch. Moving across orbital planes, the spacecraft, which are apparently the size of a small refrigerator, are able to get really close to other satellites. As close as, say, a few dozen feet. And if they can get that close, the little robots could spy on, hijack, or even destroy other satellites. Cosmos 2491 and the other satellites might be space weapons, the likes of which few other nations possess. And if so, they could upset the orbital balance of power at a time when government agencies, armies, scientists, and everyday people in the United States especially depending on satellites for communication, surveillance, science, and navigation.
And Dark Matter News is over. We'll return once our musical interlude again complete. Which should be in just a moment.
Richard, one question John sends me by computer. I'd be interested in his opinion of a memo from President Kennedy to the CIA suggesting the sharing of information with the Soviet Union about 10 days prior to his assassination.
Yes, great. That's a fascinating memo, and I believe the date of that is November 11th, 1963. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm somewhat familiar with this. Kennedy did, this is a confirmed memo. We learned about this less than 10 years ago, I think maybe 5-6 years ago, is when this came to light. And in it, Kennedy talked very plainly to the Central Intelligence Agency about the reality of UFO reports that could be confusing to American and Soviet military intelligence. In other words, the fear. This is something that was discussed incidentally by American UFO researchers at the time as a reason to end secrecy. That is, that these UFOs could be mistaken for enemy missiles, and we need to have open, acknowledgement of these so that a UFO doesn't start World War III.
Sure.
That's what American ufologists think. And Kennedy's memo kind of worked along the same type of argument, basically saying we need to coordinate these UFO sightings with the Soviets so that we don't have any kind of confusion. And this was dated November 11th, 1963. That's 11 days before he was assassinated in Dallas in 1963.
Yeah, exactly. And what became then of the memo?
There's no record of what response this memo received. I've gone on the guess and assumption that it goes to the CIA and they sit on it for a couple of weeks. That's easy to do, even on a memo from the president.
Sure.
Unless he's demanding it like an answer the next day, which this did not do. They sat on it, and then the next thing you know, no more President Kennedy and no more memo to worry about.
There's been a lot of that. For example, I remember when our government virtually told us that, well, the Roswell files are missing.
Oh, that's right. Back in 1994-95, the General Accounting Office, which is the investigative body of Congress, on behalf of Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico. This is a very important story.
It is.
That's right. You were very much involved in
raging in the
reporting
night
this
then.
time.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Roswell was just on some kind of getting some forward momentum at that time. And here's Stephen Schiff of New Mexico. By the way, he was working to some extent with Don Schmidt, who we were talking about earlier,
Right.
on that matter. And Schiff said, look, this is a legitimate issue to look into to see if there's anything that we can learn about it. And he asked for records of the Roswell Army Airfield from 1947, any communications to and from the base, and these should be available through Freedom of Information. And in fact, before he even asked the GAO to investigate, he went to the Air Force, and they told him some expletives and basically said, go bleep in your hat. That's a direct quote. So Schiff was completely stonewalled by the Pentagon. And he thought, well, I'll go to Congress. I'll go to the GAO. That's what they're there for. They're supposed to investigate on behalf of Congress. And they said they would try. And they did try. And what they found was that the communication records pertaining to the Roswell Army Airfield from, I think, late 1946 into early 1948 or 49, I have to look up my records, were missing. They were gone. And that there was no explanation as to why they were missing, and they should not legally have been missing. But that specific period of time, those records, all of them were gone. And these are records that really would have shed important light on what happened in Roswell in the summer of 1947. So, yeah, you've got obvious obstruction here, and they just get away with it.
Well, that was going to be the next question. How do they get away with just saying, I'm sorry, they're missing?
I think they get away with it, Art, because we live in a society we call a republic. We call it a democracy, but it's really not what it is. And I think as the years go by, the decades go by, those people who wield the power become more and more arrogant in their handling of it. And I think they realize that there really are not repercussions for what they say and what they do. I mean, we talked earlier about narco-trafficking. It's not just me who believes that narco-trafficking is deeply involved in the U.S. government. There's a lot of analysis that says this. And there's no repercussions there. There's no repercussions on the criminal banking fraud and the derivatives fraud that goes on. I mean, that's our world. And this is also the world within the United States national security state, as I've come to call it.
Again,
it's the movie Alien. Remember in the first Alien movie where the creature comes out of the guy's chest?
Oh, yeah.
And he died, and it's a gruesome scene. But that's like us. I mean, you have the old American Republic, which is the dead body, and out of it springs this national security empire that really is the new incarnation of the United States.
Well, we live in this world of the 24-hour news cycle. And then everything gets forgotten.
Our news propaganda cycle. It's really, I think, designed to pacify most of us. It's my opinion. Miley Cyrus's twerking is the headline, or Caitlyn Jenner's transgender. I mean, this is the headline. I think we can see that we're dealing with distractions.
I know. Mark in Pennsylvania recalls that you interviewed a 77-year-old man facing kidney failure. And he did tell you what he knew about Roswell. Is the man still alive, and what did he tell you?
He is still alive. His health, he's been, for the past year or more, been placed into a nursing home because his family's been unable to care for him. This is on YouTube. Anyone can look at it. You can look up on YouTube. They call it Dying CIA Officer Testifies About UFOs. He wasn't a CIA officer. He wasn't even a CIA employee. He worked in U.S. Army signal intelligence in the late 1950s and claimed, and by the way, he was interviewed years ago by Linda Moulton Howe back in the late 90s. And Linda knows his story very well. I interviewed him in early 2013, way up in northern Minnesota, which is where he lived.
Right.
I say that. There were a few times when I interviewed this man that I actually was afraid he was going to die in front of me. His health was that bad. It was actually really, really frightening at times. He was a sweet man, and I genuinely liked him. He told a story that is very difficult to prove and really difficult to corroborate. And so for that reason, I'm careful about it to this day. On the other hand, I have a hard time thinking that he was lying to me. And what he said was that back in the late 50s, he was a young man. He was assigned to work underneath a man who was a CIA station chief in the U.S., even though CIA was supposed to be only international. That was never solely true, he said, and they had a U.S. component. And his job was to analyze UFO photographs coming in from overseas. That was his initial job. That morphed into him and his boss being sent supposedly by President Eisenhower to go to what we call Area 51, because Eisenhower, according to the story, was frustrated in his attempts to get information about the ET program that was there, got tired of being stonewalled and said, you guys are going to find out. If you do not find out, I will send in the army to invade the area. That's what this man said. You can imagine. What he claimed is that he went in with his boss, and there were two other CIA people with him, accompanied by a local Area 51 officer who gave them a tour. This man said he saw a Roswell craft. He said he saw, this would be in 1959, a live alien being behind glass that was there, that communicated with him telepathically, briefly. The message, we mean you no harm. That's according to this man.
That's gigantic. Actually, you know, I'm sorry, Richard. There is a reason that the legal world gives way more weight to dying declarations, or people who even think they're dying. There's a reason for that. People tend not to lie when they're dying.
That was my sense of this man. And the other thing that I will add is that I didn't just meet him. I met his son-in-law, who I really liked his son-in-law. His son-in-law was a seminary student, an older man, but he was a seminary student, so he was doing religious studies. These are church-going people, and not that I'm particularly church-going myself, but I respect people who do that, and I think there is something about the personality of these types of individuals. And the son-in-law knew his father-in-law's story inside and out, and had known it for years. And all he was able to say is, look, I believe the old man, and I believed him for years. So you've got all of that. It would be nice if we were able to find any kind of further confirmation of, let's say, Eisenhower's plan to invade Area 51. Apparently, he was given enough information by them that he decided, I guess I won't do that. Who knows? I mean, this may be forever one of these stories that just clouds the field, and we may not be able to get a confirmation on it. But I will just say that my personal interaction with this man was such that I don't believe he was lying. Could he have been confabulating? The man was on meds. He was on painkillers. He was in serious physical pain. Could it have clouded his judgment? Sure. I mean, I suppose it could have, but I don't think he was lying to me.
All right. You're pretty familiar, I'm sure, with what Bob Lazar has had to say about Area 51.
Yeah. I'm a believer in Lazar's fundamental story. I guess I'll just state that for the record.
Good. So am I.
Oh,
and
okay.
It sort of underwrites what you just said, in a way. At least some of it does, that stuff is there. Do you think it's still there, Richard?
Probably, Groom Lake, at least south of Area 51. S4 south of Area 51. And I think there's an underground facility there. I think that there are many underground facilities actually throughout the United States. Technology's been there for years, and I think that there is one there. I got the chance to meet Bob Lazar finally, just less than a year ago in Phoenix at the International UFO Congress, briefly, but it was nice to meet him. George Knapp, a friend of mine, introduced us. And Lazar actually gave a much better explication of a lot of what his experience was when he was there back in 1988, 89. And yes, I thought he was credible to me. I think most people who listened to him thought he was credible as well. For many years, Stanton Friedman, who I consider a friend and a colleague, has always been a little unhappy with me. I think very unhappy with me because I do credit Lazar's story, but What can I say? I do. I dreaded researching it for my second volume of UFOs in the national security state. There's so many minefields in the UFO subject, and Lazar's story is certainly one. But after I dove into it, I became very acquainted with it. I feel that he's not a liar, and I feel that I think he was telling the truth as he understands it.
Well, there's one measure that I use. I've been interviewing for years, forever, it seems like. And I've noticed that people who tend to not tell the truth, the first time you hear their story, it's like, wow. And then the second time you hear their story, there are additional details. Okay, maybe. Third time you hear their story, there are amazing additional details. The thing about Bob Lazar is he always tells the same story.
Exactly. And he's never cared to speculate beyond what he experienced. He's always been very careful.
Even if you pull him, he doesn't. You're right.
And he's not afraid to say, I don't know. He said that many times. And he's just right. He's never gone. He said that he saw a number of flying discs. He saw what he called the sports model UFO. Mm-hmm. And he is very, very explicit, very particular about it.
Well, my feeling is that stuff is still there. It would be hard to move. It would be dangerous to move.
Exactly. And I agree completely with that.
And it's just over the hill from me. You know where I am, right? I can actually look at a mountain range, and it's right over there.
And, we say, well, it's the most well-known secret place in the world, but it really is secret. I mean, it's still impossible to get there, basically. Oh. And, when you're underground, you can do anything you want, basically. And I think that's what they do.
You bet your life. Literally. If you try to get there. So,
and this is part of the really important element of the UFO mystery, which is the secret technology program, of which S4 is a part of, and I'm sure there are other facilities that are part of it. And I really think what they're trying to do, among other things, is weaponize this technology.
Yes.
Whether it's electromagnetic weapons or electrical frequency or high-powered microwaves or propulsion technologies or material science, even mind control, I think is one of the kinds of technologies that they're trying to weaponize based on their encounter with the UFO phenomenon. I think all of those are part of it. And to the people who have this technology, I think the stakes are very high because, if you're America running a global empire, you can't let any rivals get into the game like Russia or anyone else. So they want those weapons.
That's an awfully good question. I guess we know a little bit about our own country and how we've responded and what we don't talk about and what we do talk about. But what about the rest of the world? The Soviets, for example, China. Do you think they have had encounters that rival the things that have occurred here?
I think it's entirely possible. I think the Russians certainly have. I guess I'll just take the opportunity to plug a book I'm about to publish by two authors. One is a Russian he's anglicized named Paul Stonehill, and Philip Mantle, an UK author. And they're doing a book on Russian USOs, unidentified submersible objects. And this is, I think, the first ever study of this, and I'll have it out probably by the fall. But the fact is that the Russians have a long history of spectacular encounters with UFOs. And, during the breakup of the Soviet Union, we learned a lot about them. This was the real moment in Russian history where information came out. It was like their version of freedom of information. Right. And KGB files became available and much more. So we know that there were some serious military encounters, and they may have had their own versions of Roswell at places like Dalmagorsk in 1986 and a few others. So, yeah, I think that it's very likely that they have their own knowledge of this program, and they may share or not share to some degree with the United States. That's a question I don't know the answer to. Chinese, probably the same thing. There was a story that came to me by a fellow named Scott Jones. He's still alive. Mm-hmm. Retired Navy pilot, and was a former aide to this Rhode Island Senator Claiborne Pell, who was very interested in UFOs for years, kept it very quiet. Scott Jones, on behalf of Pell, one time went to China. This is early 90s. Mm-hmm. This was like before China went through their own major industrial revolution. But one of the reasons he actually went was to get a sense of Chinese UFO research. believe it or not. And he was impressed. He said they had a lot of PhDs, a lot of smart people doing sophisticated work. And he said, you guys are way ahead of anything that I'm aware of in American civilian UFO research. What are you waiting for? And the answer that came to him is they said, we're waiting for the U.S. to take the lead on this.
Really?
That's what Jones said to me and probably to other people. That's early 90s. Now, who knows what the situation is today? I think Russia and China are wild cards in this. I speculate that I don't think that they have a real motivation any more than America to give up the UFO secret, but you never know. I think the real problem that any of these nations have in giving up the secret is oil. You give up the secret, you say, yes, some of these UFOs actually are not ours. They are using revolutionary technology. One of the first questions that's going to be out of the gate is, well, what's their source of energy? It's obviously not high-octane petroleum.
Right.
That's going to take them from point A to point B. It's going to be something better. Whatever that source is, implicit in the answer to the UFO mystery is a post-petroleum civilization, and that is such a massive transformation. And Russia, I don't really think, has any more of a motivation than America.
All right. I've got to hold it right there. Stand by. I'm sorry. I have these absolute deadlines. This is midnight in the desert.
And with that, we will leave Art Bell for this evening. Come back tomorrow night. We will have the conclusion. I certainly hope he does take a few phone calls. Normally, most of these episodes, they do. But I will admit I did not listen ahead on this episode, so I do not definitely for sure know that to be a fact. Oh, I didn't notice that there is a 4X emerald sale out. If you are looking to buy emeralds, you can get it at 4 times the perk. Most of the folks love when those do become available. We will finish today at 333 in the Grand Arena and 250. Pretty darn close to our absolute best. In the deal. Alright. So, I have had a few people send emails saying they did love us doing a few Hyper Judge Judy cases last night for our final few minutes. We did go ahead and have at least the ability we were able to get through from the mores that we've been doing the last couple nights there, but I will go ahead and bring you some love. Let's go ahead and have Judge Judy doing something that she does quite well.
February 16th, 2008. I handed directly to Jessica.
So you don't interrupt. So you had the car for 2 weeks.
I picked up the car.
Put your hand down, or else you're going out. Do you understand?
Yeah.
You knew that he had a suspended license.
Yes.
And she was completely
Jack-
okay with it.
I didn't ask you a question.
Just drive it back to the apartment and park it until he got his license in.
No, that's not
Shut
true.
up. Did you hear me? I said people just don't stand up here.
She was able to drive the car the whole time.
Listen to me. Don't say anything. I don't need any help from you.
Who she was, I've never seen her before in my life.
You
Never
always
talked to
wanted-
her whatsoever.
Now out.
Okay.
Now out. Just a second. Out. Just out. Just out. Thank you very much. There's only one ringmaster here. That's me.
Yeah, and I've never met
Just
her
a
before.
second. She showed up at your door and said,
I opened the door though.
goodbye.
Bye!
getting more orderly here by the moment.
That's 2.
You're doing a great job.
I like Bert. You're doing a great
You
job.
wouldn't have gotten into trouble. So kiss your deposit goodbye. Put your hand down. Put your hand. Throw him out.
She let him.
Throw him out.
She let him drive it. She let him drive it. She knew he was going to drive it. I'm going out, but it's all on her.
He's going out. Nobody hears you except yourself.
She knew he was going to drive it.
Do you understand, sir?
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
Step up.
Threw out not 1, not 2, but 3 epic morons. Thank you. Alright, so here's another quick case.
Joanne Flanoy is suing former friend, 23-year-old Precious Greer, for damaging her car when she jumped on the hood because she was scared of a dog.
The defendant says that while in fact you were sitting on her car, you didn't damage her car. Yes.
This thing I know, little kid crossed the street, came outside with a German Shepherd. This thing I know, the dog got off the leash. He ran across the street at another neighbor's house, and we all looking. This thing, the dog turned and came where we. So her instinct as a female, you know, she jumped on the hood of the car. I grabbed my little one. In her mind, she jumped on the hood of the car. So when she jumped on the hood of the car, I'm like, get off the car, get off the car. She ain't get out yet. You need to get off the car. You need to get off the car.
When I first seen the car, I was like, I thought he had a Lincoln. So I'm like, whose car is this? And he was like, his car. And I said, okay, well, can I have a seat on your car while I talk to my husband?
That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. How old are you?
I'm 23.
23-year-olds should know better than to say, can I sit on your car? Sit on your stoop. Sit on your hands. Take out a chair. You don't sit on somebody else's car.
We do that.
Not we do that. You know why you don't do that? First of all, because you're a very nice lady and you have a very nice shape. You're not Twiggy. Which means that when you put your weight on metal, it may damage the metal. But you don't do that on somebody else's car.
My car was going at the time.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Could I see the estimate for the damage, please? And can I... Don't speak. Don't speak. I can't. My head is full. And this is on the hood of the car.
Yes, ma'am.
On the side I wasn't sitting on.
Stop. Speak. Spend your time on something worthwhile. Judging for the plaintiff in the amount of $1,300. That's all.
My nephew is the one who actually damaged their car.
Look at her size. You know, if anybody get on a car that size, that's what's going to happen.
Them clowns just stay out of my neighborhood.
Jump on your own car.
Alrighty. And if you do believe in the paranormal and everything else that we do have from our Art Bell Part 3, well, something may have just happened while we were finishing that Judge Judy Hyper case that may actually lend credibility. The landing air conditioner just turned itself on at 3 a.m. local time here. And the thing is, I think I actually unplugged it after it did that itself a few days ago. So once I do finish this episode and go take a look, it might be quite unnerving to myself to look. But with that, we do come to the end of our broadcast day here from day one. So of course, make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Get us to those goals of 50,000 viewers and 1,000 subscribers. So Boxy over at Extras will send us those nice red packages so we can send those gifts off to lovely folks like you. And YouTube will pay attention to us. CoinBase and Ibotta below both get you $10 when you do fill out to set up for those services. Coinbase lets you do Coinbase Learn 2-minute lessons, 1-question quizzes to get up to $100 in free crypto. Oh, I didn't notice that we didn't put it as part 3, but well, it's been part 3 all episode, and I think you guys knew that. So when we do go ahead and meet again tomorrow, before then, make sure your fights in Dominion are awesome. If you are doing your guild wars before going to bed, make sure that your fights are awesome and victorious. Be kind to one another, because again, in the world, when it all boils down, it's all we have of one another. And it's always a great new world to release the Krakens. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see each other tomorrow as we continue on in this great world of From Day One. Have a great night and enjoy your rest. We'll see you tomorrow.